Staff Sergeant Emma Rodriguez had always been small for her age, and at 26, standing barely 5'2" in her combat boots, she looked even younger when she arrived at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada for her new assignment as an avionics technician. The jokes started immediately. "Hey, did someone's daughter get lost on the base tour?" laughed Technical Sergeant Mark Davidson, a towering man with arms like tree trunks who ran the avionics shop. The other airmen snickered as Emma approached with her paperwork, her oversized flight bag dragging behind her. Emma had heard it all before. At her previous base in North Carolina, they'd called her Mouse because she spoke softly and kept to herself. She preferred working with circuit boards and diagnostic equipment over small talk anyway. Electronics made sense. People rarely did. "Sergeant Rodriguez reporting for duty, sir," she said quietly, extending her orders to Davidson. He barely glanced at the papers. "Rodriguez, huh? Well, I hope you're better with your hands than you look, because we work on $1,000,000 aircraft here, not toy planes." More laughter from the shop. Emma's face burned, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. "Yes, sir. I'm certified on F-16 avionics systems and have experience with—" Yeah, everyone's an expert until they touch real equipment," Davidson cut her off. "Jenkins, show the new girl where she can put her stuff. Try not to break anything on the way." Senior Airman Bobby Jenkins, a lanky kid who couldn't have been older than 20, rolled his eyes but led Emma to a workbench in the corner. "Don't take it personal," he whispered. "Davidson's like that with everyone new. Well, everyone small and new anyway." Over the next few weeks, Emma threw herself into the work. She arrived early, stayed late, and studied technical manuals during her lunch breaks. When other technicians struggled with complex electrical problems, she'd quietly offer suggestions, only to be brushed off. "I don't need help from someone who needs a stepladder to reach the cockpit," Davidson would say, even when Emma's ideas proved correct hours later. The real trouble started when Captain Lisa Hoffman, the maintenance officer, assigned Emma to lead diagnostics on an F-16 that had been grounded for 2 weeks with intermittent radar failures. It was exactly the kind of puzzle Emma excelled at, complex, requiring patience and systematic thinking. "You sure about this, ma'am?" Davidson asked the captain, not bothering to lower his voice. "Rodriguez is still pretty green. Maybe someone with more experience should—" "She has the highest avionics scores I've seen in 5 years, Captain Hoffman replied firmly. "She's leading this repair." Emma felt the weight of every eye in the shop. Some looked skeptical, others openly amused. Davidson's face had gone stone cold. That afternoon, while Emma was deep in the aircraft's electrical bay with her multimeter and schematic, Davidson appeared beside her. "Listen up, Rodriguez," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing with the captain, but this is my shop. You make me look bad. You'll regret it, clear?" Emma's hands trembled slightly as she continued testing circuits. "I'm just trying to do my job, Sergeant." "Your job is what I say it is, and right now, your job is to remember your place." As Davidson walked away, Emma realized she was holding her breath. She'd dealt with difficult supervisors before, but something about Davidson felt different, meaner, more personal. She looked around the shop at the other airmen, hoping for some sign of support, but they'd all suddenly become very interested in their own work. Emma had never felt more alone, but she had a job to do, and she was going to do it right, no matter what Davidson thought. Emma found the radar problem on her 3rd day of diagnostics, a hairline crack in a circuit board connector that only showed up under specific temperature and vibration conditions. It was the kind of intermittent fault that could drive technicians crazy for weeks. "Outstanding work, Rodriguez," Captain Hoffman said when Emma presented her findings. "How'd you catch something that subtle?" "I noticed the failure pattern. Matched environmental conditions during taxi and takeoff," Emma explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "So I used a heat gun and vibration table to recreate the conditions in the shop." Davidson had been standing nearby, listening. His jaw was clenched tight. "Lucky guess," he muttered. But Captain Hoffman wasn't buying it. This kind of systematic troubleshooting is exactly what we need more of. I'm recommending Rodriguez for advanced diagnostics training. The next morning, Emma arrived to find her toolbox lock cut and her expensive personal test equipment scattered across the floor. Her laptop, which contained all her technical notes and reference materials, had been dropped, and the screen was cracked. "Wow, Rodriguez, you really should be more careful with your gear," Davidson said loudly as she knelt to gather her scattered tools. "Can't trust someone who doesn't take care of their equipment to work on aircraft." Emma's throat tightened, but she said nothing. The equipment represented nearly $1,000 she'd saved over 2 years, money she couldn't afford to replace. "I saw what happened," a quiet voice said behind her. Emma turned to find senior airman Maria Santos, one of the few other women in the shop. Maria was older, maybe early 30s, with graying temples and kind eyes. "That wasn't an accident." Emma glanced around nervously. "I must have left it unsecured." "No, you didn't." Maria knelt down to help gather the tools. "Emma, right? I've been watching you work. You're methodical, careful. You don't leave $1,000 equipment lying around loose." For the first time in weeks, Emma felt like someone actually saw her. "It doesn't matter. I can't prove anything." "Maybe not yet," Maria said quietly. "But Davidson's done this before. To other people. Other women, mostly. He's just usually more careful about it." Over the following days, things got worse. Emma's duty assignments were changed at the last minute, sending her to the far end of the flight line for menial tasks while important repairs went to less experienced technicians. Her leave requests were denied without explanation. Worst of all, Davidson started spreading rumors about her competence. "I heard Rodriguez screwed up $1 million radar system," she overheard him telling a group of airmen, "had to bring in a real technician to fix her mess." Emma knew she should report the harassment, but what could she prove? Davidson was careful to have witnesses for his public criticisms, and the sabotage of her equipment could have been anyone. Besides, who would believe her word against a 10-year veteran with commendations on his wall? The doubt crept in slowly. Maybe she wasn't as good as she thought. Maybe she was just the awkward kid playing dress-up in a military uniform. Maybe Davidson was right about her knowing her place. But then she'd catch Maria watching her with those knowing eyes, or she'd remember Captain Hoffman's praise, and something inside her would straighten up again. One evening, working late on a routine inspection, Emma overheard Davidson on the phone in his office. "Yeah, the new girl's exactly what you'd expect," he was saying. "Typical diversity hire. Probably wash out in a few months when she realizes she's in over her head. No, she hasn't filed any complaints yet, but they always do eventually. That's when you know you've got them beat." Emma's hands stilled on her wrench. Davidson wasn't just picking on her randomly. This was a pattern, a system, and she was just the latest target. For the first time since arriving at Nellis, Emma felt something other than doubt or fear. She felt angry. The breaking point came 3 weeks later during a routine inspection of an F-16 scheduled for a training mission. Emma was checking the aircraft's environmental control system when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. 2 critical safety pins had been removed from the ejection seat, but the corresponding safety flags weren't displayed in the cockpit. It was a potentially fatal oversight. If the pilot tried to eject, the seat might not function properly. If he didn't try to eject in an actual emergency, he might die in a crash that could have been survivable. Emma immediately flagged the issue and grounded the aircraft following proper safety protocols. The pilot, a young lieutenant fresh out of flight school, looked shaken when she explained what she'd found. "Jesus, Rodriguez, good catch," he said. "I could have been killed." But when Emma filled out the incident report, Davidson exploded. "You grounded a multi-million-dollar aircraft over 2 missing pins?" he shouted, loud enough for the entire hangar to hear. "Do you have any idea what that does to our mission readiness numbers?" Emma stood her ground, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The ejection seat was unsafe. I followed proper procedures." "Proper procedures, my ass. This is what happens when you put someone in charge who doesn't understand the big picture." Davidson grabbed the incident report from her hands. "I'm not submitting this garbage. Those pins were probably removed for maintenance and just hadn't been replaced yet." "But Sergeant, the maintenance logs don't show—" I don't want to hear it, Rodriguez. You've caused enough problems. Davidson tore up the report in front of her. The aircraft is cleared for flight. End of discussion. Emma felt the world tilt slightly. Davidson was ordering her to ignore a major safety violation, something that went against every principle of aircraft maintenance she'd been taught. Around the hangar, other airmen had stopped working to watch the confrontation, but no one spoke up. I can't clear an unsafe aircraft, Emma said quietly. Davidson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You can and you will. Or maybe you'd prefer to explain to Captain Hoffman why you're not cut out for this job after all. That evening, Emma sat in her small dorm room staring at her phone. She'd drafted a text to Captain Hoffman at least 10 times, trying to explain what had happened, but each attempt seemed to make her sound paranoid or incompetent. She thought about her father, a retired army mechanic who'd taught her to work with her hands. Integrity isn't about being brave, he'd always said. It's about doing the right thing even when no one's watching. But people were watching now. The entire shop knew Davidson had overruled her safety call. If she pushed back, it would be her word against his, and she already knew how that would go. Around midnight, unable to sleep, Emma walked back to the hangar. The F-16 sat in its parking spot, looking innocent under the harsh fluorescent lights. She pulled out her flashlight and climbed up to inspect the ejection seat one more time. The pins were still missing. The safety flags were still not displayed. In 6 hours, a 22-year-old pilot would climb into this cockpit, trusting that people like her had done their jobs correctly. Emma thought about her own little brother, also 22, who'd wanted to be a pilot before his vision disqualified him. She thought about all the pilots she'd never meet who depended on technicians they'd never see to keep them alive in the sky. Davidson might have torn up her incident report, but Emma remembered every regulation number, every safety protocol, every chain of command procedure she'd memorized during her training. For the first time in her Air Force career, Staff Sergeant Emma Rodriguez was going to make some noise. She pulled out her personal phone and started taking pictures. Emma spent the rest of that sleepless night researching regulations. The Air Force had clear procedures for reporting safety violations, especially when someone in the chain of command tried to suppress them. She found the Inspector General complaint process, the safety hotline numbers, and most importantly, the whistleblower protection provisions that theoretically protected her from retaliation. At 0600, she submitted a formal safety report through the base safety office, bypassing Davidson entirely. She included photos of the unsafe ejection seat, copies of the maintenance logs, and a detailed timeline of events. Then she sent a separate Inspector General complaint documenting Davidson's pattern of harassment and his attempt to suppress the safety violation. The response was swift. By 0800, the F-16 was officially grounded pending investigation. By 0900, Emma was sitting in the base safety officer's office, going through her evidence step by step. Major Patricia Williams, the safety officer, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. She listened without interruption as Emma explained everything. "You did the right thing, Sergeant Rodriguez," Major Williams said finally. "This kind of safety violation could have been catastrophic. But I have to warn you, filing an IG complaint against your supervisor is going to make things uncomfortable. For you." Emma had expected that. What she hadn't expected was how quickly word would spread. By lunch, everyone on base seemed to know that the quiet little airman had gone over Davidson's head. The reactions were mixed. Some airmen avoided her like she had a contagious disease, while others nodded approvingly when they thought no one was looking. Davidson's reaction was predictable. "You've really done it now, Rodriguez," he said, when she returned to the shop. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You've just destroyed the career of a man with 10 years of exemplary service." But Emma had done her homework. That evening, she stayed late in the base library, digging through old safety reports and personnel files that were matters of public record. What she found made her stomach churn. Davidson's exemplary service included 3 previous safety violations that had been quietly resolved, 2 sexual harassment complaints that had been dismissed for lack of evidence, and a pattern of personnel turnover in his shop that was significantly higher than base average. Most damning of all, she found a safety report from 2 years earlier involving a female airman named Jennifer Walsh, who had tried to report unsafe maintenance practices. Walsh's complaint had been buried, and she'd been transferred to another base 6 months later. Emma tracked down Walsh's current assignment and sent her a carefully worded email. The response came the next morning. "I've been waiting for someone to ask about Davidson for 2 years. Can we talk?" Emma's hands were shaking as she set up the encrypted phone call. Walsh's story was eerily similar to her own. The harassment, the isolation, the safety violations, and finally the retaliation that had driven her to request a transfer just to escape. "He's done this before," Walsh told her, "multiple times. But he's smart about it. He picks women who are new, isolated, without strong support networks, and he's careful to make it look like performance issues rather than harassment." "Why didn't you fight back?" Emma asked. "I tried, but I was a senior airman going up against a well-connected NCO. I didn't have evidence, didn't have allies. By the time I realized what was happening, I just wanted out." Walsh paused. "But you're different. You documented everything. You have the safety violation to back up your claims, and you're not alone anymore." That last part turned out to be more true than Emma had realized. The next morning, Maria Santos approached her during their break. "I talked to some of the other women who've worked in Davidson's shop over the years," Maria said quietly. "We want to help. If you're really going to take him down, you're going to need witnesses." Emma looked around the break room at the small group of women who had gathered, 5 airmen from different shops, different ranks, different backgrounds. But they all had one thing in common. They'd all dealt with Davidson's harassment and said nothing. "I can't ask you to risk your careers," Emma said. "You're not asking," replied Staff Sergeant Linda Chen, a crew chief from the flight line. "We're volunteering. It's time someone stood up to him." For the first time since arriving at Nellis, Emma didn't feel small or alone. She felt like part of something bigger, a group of professional military women who were tired of being pushed around. The fight was just beginning, but now she had allies. The Inspector General investigation moved faster than Emma had expected. Within a week, investigators were interviewing personnel throughout the maintenance group, and Davidson's confident swagger was beginning to crack. Emma watched him during the morning briefings, noting how he kept glancing toward the door whenever someone knocked, how his hands shook slightly when Captain Hoffman announced that all safety protocols were under review. The breakthrough came when Staff Sergeant Linda Chen provided testimony about her own experiences with Davidson 2 years earlier. Unlike Emma, Chen was a 10-year veteran with multiple commendations and the respect of her peers. When she spoke, people listened. "He told me that women didn't belong on the flight line," Chen testified to the investigators, "said we were a distraction and a liability. When I tried to report unsafe practices in his shop, he told me I was being emotional and needed to learn my place." The investigators also discovered that Davidson had been falsifying training records, marking airmen as qualified on procedures they'd never actually performed. It was a career-ending violation that he'd apparently been covering up for months. But Davidson wasn't going down without a fight. He started a whisper campaign trying to turn the investigation back on Emma. "Rodriguez is a disgruntled employee trying to destroy an NCO's career because she couldn't hack it," he told anyone who would listen. "This whole thing is just a witch hunt by a bunch of feminists who can't handle military discipline." The campaign might have worked if not for the mounting evidence. The other women came forward one by one, each adding another piece to the puzzle of Davidson's pattern of harassment and safety violations. Senior Airman Jennifer Walsh flew in from her new base in Germany to testify via secure video link. Her testimony was devastating. 2 hours of detailed accounts of harassment, intimidation, and safety violations that perfectly matched the pattern Emma had documented. The turning point came when the investigators found Davidson's personal files. Buried in his desk drawer were copies of performance evaluations he'd never submitted, all documenting excellent work by female airmen that contradicted the negative reviews he'd actually filed. Emma learned about this discovery from Major Williams, who called her in for an update on the investigation. "He kept the real evaluations like trophies," Major Williams explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Proof that he knew these Women were excellent airmen, even while he was destroying their careers with false reports. Emma felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. After weeks of wondering if she was overreacting, if she was being too sensitive, she finally had proof that Davidson's harassment was deliberate and systematic. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we finish building the case. The safety violation." Alone would be enough to end his career, but with the pattern of harassment and the falsified records, he's looking at possible criminal charges. That afternoon, Emma was working on a routine repair when she noticed Davidson watching her from across the hangar. For the first time since she'd filed her complaint, he looked genuinely afraid. Their eyes met for a moment, and Emma saw something she'd never seen before in Davidson's face, the recognition that he'd finally picked on someone who wouldn't back down. Davidson looked away first. Word was spreading beyond the base now. Emma received a call from an Air Force Times reporter who had gotten wind of the investigation. She declined to comment, but the knowledge that the story was becoming public added another layer of pressure. The end came sooner than anyone expected. On a Tuesday morning, Captain Hoffman called the entire maintenance group together for an emergency briefing. Effective immediately, Technical Sergeant Davidson has been relieved of his duties pending the outcome of an ongoing investigation, she announced. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will be assuming temporary supervision of the avionics shop. Emma felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Some looked surprised, others approving, a few still skeptical, but for the first time in months, no one was laughing at her. Davidson wasn't there to hear the announcement. He'd been escorted off base an hour earlier by security forces, his career in ruins and criminal charges pending. The quiet little airman had won. The formal hearing took place 3 weeks later in the base legal office. Emma had never been in a military courtroom before, and the formal atmosphere was intimidating. Wood paneling, flags, uniformed officers sitting behind an imposing bench. Davidson sat at the defendant's table with his military defense counsel, looking smaller somehow than he had in the maintenance hangar. He'd lost weight, and his uniform, while still regulation, seemed to hang loose on his frame. Emma was the key witness, and she'd prepared meticulously. She had her original incident reports, her photographs of the unsafe ejection seat, copies of all her documentation, and most importantly, her testimony about the pattern of harassment and safety violations. Sergeant Rodriguez, the prosecutor began, please tell the court about the events of November 15th when you discovered the safety violation on aircraft tail number 870257. Emma's voice was steady as she recounted finding the missing ejection seat pins, Davidson's order to ignore the safety violation, and his destruction of her incident report. She spoke clearly and professionally, sticking to the facts without editorial comment. Davidson's defense attorney tried to paint her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but Emma's documentation was too thorough, her testimony too consistent. Isn't it true, Sergeant Rodriguez, that you filed this complaint only after receiving negative performance feedback from Sergeant Davidson? No, sir. I filed the complaint because Sergeant Davidson ordered me to clear an unsafe aircraft for flight, which could have resulted in the death of the pilot. The defense attorney pressed harder. But you admit you had difficulties adapting to Sergeant Davidson's leadership style? Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. I had difficulties with being told to ignore safety regulations, falsify maintenance records, and endure daily harassment because of my gender. If that's a leadership style, then yes, I had difficulties with it. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Even Davidson's attorney seemed taken aback by her quiet, matter-of-fact response. The other witnesses were equally devastating. Jennifer. Walsh testified via video link about her experiences 2 years earlier. Linda Chen, Maria Santos, and 3 other women provided detailed accounts of harassment and discrimination spanning Davidson's entire tenure at Nellis. But the most damaging testimony came from Chief Master Sergeant Robert Hayes, the senior enlisted advisor for the maintenance group. Hayes was a 30-year veteran with an impeccable reputation, and his words carried enormous weight. In 30 years of military service, Hayes testified, I have never seen such a systematic pattern of harassment and safety violations. Sergeant Davidson's actions endangered not only individual airmen, but the safety and readiness of our entire mission. When it came time for Davidson to testify in his own defense, his story fell apart under cross-examination. He contradicted himself multiple times, claimed he couldn't remember key events, and finally lost his composure entirely. "These women are just trying to destroy my career because they can't handle military discipline," he shouted at the prosecutor. "Rodriguez is a weak airman who never should have been allowed in the military." The outburst sealed his fate. Even his own defense attorney looked embarrassed. The deliberation took less than 2 hours. Davidson was found guilty on multiple charges: dereliction of duty, failure to obey lawful orders, conduct unbecoming an NCO, and violation of the military equal opportunity policy. As the verdict was read, Emma felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, vindication, but also sadness for what the whole situation had cost. The pilots who might have been endangered, the careers that had been damaged, the trust that had been broken. Davidson was sentenced to reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, and dismissal from the Air Force. He would also face potential civilian criminal charges for some of his actions. As the courtroom cleared, Captain Hoffman approached Emma. "I owe you an apology, Sergeant Rodriguez. I should have seen what was happening sooner." Emma shook her head. "You supported me when it mattered, ma'am. That's what counts." Outside the courtroom, the group of women who had testified gathered around Emma. For the first time in months, they were all smiling. "You did it," Maria Santos said, squeezing Emma's shoulder. "You actually took him down." Emma looked at the faces around her, women who had found their courage because she had found hers first. "We did it," she corrected. "All of us together." The quiet little airman had become something she'd never expected to be: a leader. The changes at Nellis Air Force Base were immediate and far-reaching. Within a week of Davidson's conviction, the base commander announced a comprehensive review of all maintenance operations and a mandatory retraining program on military equal opportunity policies. Emma found herself promoted to technical sergeant 2 months ahead of schedule and officially appointed as the supervisor of the avionics shop. The promotion ceremony was small but meaningful. Captain Hoffman pinned on her new stripes while her father, who had flown in from Texas for the occasion, watched with tears in his eyes. "I always knew you had it in you, mija," he told her afterward. "Your mother would be so proud." The shop itself had transformed. With Davidson gone, the toxic atmosphere evaporated almost overnight. Airmen who had been silent before began speaking up about problems and suggesting improvements. Productivity increased, and for the first time in years, the avionics section exceeded all their maintenance metrics. Emma's leadership style was the opposite of Davidson's. She listened more than she spoke, led by example rather than intimidation, and made sure every airman in her shop knew their contributions mattered. She instituted weekly safety briefings where anyone could raise concerns without fear of retaliation. "It's like working in a completely different place," Senior Airman Bobby Jenkins told her one afternoon. "People actually want to come to work now." The ripple effects extended beyond Nellis. The Air Force Times article about the case had sparked conversations at bases worldwide about harassment, safety culture, and the importance of protecting whistleblowers. Emma received dozens of emails from airmen sharing their own stories and thanking her for having the courage to speak up. One email particularly moved her. It was from a young female airman at a base in Japan who had been dealing with harassment from her supervisor. "Reading about your case gave me the courage to file my own complaint," the airman wrote. "I documented everything just like you did. The investigation is ongoing, but I finally feel like someone is listening. Thank you for showing me that we don't have to suffer in silence." Emma printed that email and kept it in her desk drawer, a reminder of why the fight had been worth it. The legal proceedings against Davidson continued in civilian court. He was ultimately convicted of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 2 years probation. His military dismissal meant he lost all veterans' benefits and would have to start over in civilian life at age 35. Emma felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that he would never again be in a position to hurt other airmen. 6 months after the hearing, Emma received an unexpected visitor. Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, the base safety officer, who had supported her investigation, knocked on her office door with a proposal. "I'm putting together a team to develop new safety reporting procedures for the entire Air Force," Williams explained. "We want to make it easier for airmen to report violations without fear of retaliation. I'd like you to be part of that team."
Emma was honored but hesitant. "I'm not sure I'm the right person, ma'am. I'm still pretty new to all this." "You're exactly the right person," Williams replied. "You understand what it's like to be afraid to speak up, and you know what it takes to overcome that fear."
"We need that perspective." Emma accepted the assignment, and over the next year she helped develop new training programs and reporting procedures that were implemented Air Force-wide. The Rodriguez Protocol, as it came to be informally known, made it easier for junior airmen to report safety violations and harassment without going through potentially hostile chains of command. The quiet little airman had become a voice for change throughout the entire Air Force. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. Emma had discovered something about herself that she'd never known before. She was stronger than she'd ever imagined, and she had a gift for helping others find their own strength. She was still quiet, still modest, still more comfortable with circuit boards than crowds. But she was no longer the frightened mouse who had arrived at Nellis a year earlier. She was a leader. 2 years after Davidson's conviction, Emma sat in her office at Nellis, reviewing the monthly safety reports. The statistics told a remarkable story. Safety violations were being reported at 3 times the previous rate, not because the Air Force had become less safe, but because airmen finally felt safe reporting problems. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. A young airman entered, looking nervous and uncertain. She was small, maybe 19 years old, with oversized uniform sleeves and the deer-in-headlights expression Emma remembered from her own early days. "Ma'am, I'm Airman First Class Jessica Parker. I just got assigned to your shop." Emma smiled, remembering her own first day at Nellis. "Welcome to the team, Parker. Have a seat." As Parker settled into the chair across from her desk, Emma saw something familiar in the young woman's posture. The slight hunch of someone trying to make herself smaller, the quick glances around the room, the careful way she held herself. "Tell me about your background," Emma said gently. "What got you interested in avionics?" Parker's face lit up as she talked about her love of electronics, her fascination with how aircraft systems worked, her dream of someday working on the most advanced fighters in the Air Force. It was like looking in a mirror of her past self. "I know I don't look like much," Parker said, her confidence fading. "At my last base they called me Pixie because I'm so small. But I'm really good with electronics, I promise." Emma leaned back in her chair, remembering similar words she'd spoken to Davidson years earlier. "Parker, let me tell you something. The size of your body has nothing to do with the size of your contribution. What matters is your knowledge, your dedication, and your integrity." Over the following weeks, Emma watched Parker integrate into the shop. The young airman was brilliant with electronics but struggled with confidence, just as Emma had. Emma made sure to assign her meaningful work, to recognize her contributions publicly, and to shield her from the casual hazing that still sometimes occurred. "You're different from other supervisors I've had," Parker told her one day as they worked together on a complex radar repair. "You actually listen when people talk." "Someone taught me that everyone has something valuable to contribute," Emma replied. "You just have to create an environment where they feel safe to contribute it." The lessons of her confrontation with Davidson had shaped Emma's entire approach to leadership. She'd learned that real strength wasn't about dominating others or projecting authority. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. She'd also learned that she wasn't as alone as she'd once thought. The emails still came regularly from airmen around the world who had found the courage to speak up about harassment, safety violations, or other problems. Many mentioned her case as inspiration for their own decisions to act. Last month, she'd received an invitation to speak at the Air Force Academy about leadership and integrity. Standing before a room full of future officers, she'd told them about the importance of creating environments where every airman felt valued and heard. "Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room," she told the cadets. "Sometimes it's about being the quiet voice that asks the hard questions, that points out what others don't want to see, that stands up when everyone else is sitting down." After her presentation, a young female cadet had approached her. "Ma'am, I've read about your case.
You're kind of a legend among the female cadets. We all hope we can be as brave as you were." Emma had smiled, remembering her own doubts and fears.
"You don't have to be brave all the time. You just have to be brave for the few moments when it really matters." Now, sitting in her office, Emma reflected on how much had changed. The avionics shop was thriving, with some of the highest efficiency.
Ratings in the Air Force: 3 of her former airmen had been promoted ahead of schedule, and 2 had received commendations for innovative solutions to complex problems. Davidson was working as a civilian mechanic in a small town in Montana, his military career just a bitter memory. Emma occasionally wondered if he'd learned anything from the experience, but she didn't dwell on it. Her focus was on the future, not the past. The phone on her desk rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Major Williams calling from Air Force headquarters in Washington. "Emma, I've got news. The Chief of Staff wants to personally recognize your contributions to Air Force. Safety culture! You're being considered for the Lance P. Sejan Leadership Award." Emma was stunned. The Sejan Award was one of the Air Force's highest honors for leadership and integrity, named after a Vietnam War hero who exemplified courage under pressure. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but I don't think—" "Don't you dare say you don't deserve it," Williams interrupted. "You changed the culture of an entire service branch. You made it safer for every airman to do their job with integrity." After hanging up, Emma walked to her window overlooking the flight line. F-16s and F-35s sat on the ramp, their sleek forms representing millions of dollars and thousands of hours of human labor. Each one depended on the skill and dedication of maintainers like her, people whose names would never be known by the pilots who trusted them with their lives. It was still hard for Emma to believe she'd become someone others looked up to. She was still the same quiet person who preferred working with her hands to making speeches. But she'd learned that leadership wasn't about changing who you were. It was about being authentically yourself while standing up for what was right. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Airman Parker stood in the doorway holding a technical manual and looking excited. "Ma'am, I think I figured out a way to reduce the diagnostic time on the radar systems by 30%. Want to see?" Emma smiled, remembering her own excitement when she'd solved complex problems as a young airman. "Show me what you got, Parker." As the young airman enthusiastically explained her discovery, Emma felt the satisfaction of seeing the cycle continue. Parker would face her own challenges, her own moments of doubt, her own tests of integrity. But she would face them with the knowledge that she worked in an environment where innovation was rewarded, where problems could be reported without fear, where every airman's contribution mattered. That evening, Emma sat in her small apartment, looking through a box of letters and emails she'd received over the past 2 years. Stories from airmen who had found their voices, supervisors who had changed their leadership styles, and young women who had decided to stay in the military because they believed things could be different. One letter particularly stood out from a senior airman at a base in Korea. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you probably don't remember me, but I was one of the airmen who watched you take on Davidson. I was too scared to speak up then, but I've been thinking about what you did every day. Since last week I reported a safety violation in my shop. My supervisor tried to ignore it, but I documented everything just like you taught us. The violation was fixed and no one got hurt. I'm not naturally brave like you, but I'm learning that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you are afraid. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to stand up and survive. Actually, not just survive, to thrive." Emma folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. She thought about her father's words from years ago. Integrity isn't about being brave. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. She'd learned that sometimes people were watching, they were just waiting for someone else to go first. The next morning brought another typical day in the avionics shop. Emma walked through the hangar, checking on her airman's work, answering questions, solving problems. She still preferred the quiet moments with her test equipment and circuit diagrams, but she'd grown comfortable with the leadership role that had been thrust upon her. As she passed a group of new airmen receiving orientation, she overheard their supervisor explaining the shop's safety culture. "We have zero tolerance for cutting corners or ignoring problems.
the supervisor was saying. If you see something
unsafe, you report it immediately. No exceptions, no retaliation, no excuses. That's the Rodriguez standard. Emma smiled to herself. She'd never asked for her name to be associated with integrity and courage, but if it helped other airmen feel safe to do their jobs correctly, she was honored by the association. The quiet little airman, who had once been afraid to speak up, had become a symbol of what was possible when ordinary people found the courage to do extraordinary things. But Emma knew the truth that her admirers sometimes missed. She wasn't extraordinary. She was just an ordinary person who had refused to accept that things couldn't change, and maybe that was the most important lesson of all, that real change came not from heroes and legends, but from regular people who decided they'd had enough. Years from now, when Emma eventually retired from the Air Force, she would look back on the Davidson case as the defining moment of her career. Not because she'd won a fight or destroyed an enemy, but because she'd discovered that her quiet voice, when raised at the right moment, could echo across an entire service branch. She remained humble about her role in the changes that followed. When people called her a hero, she always corrected them. "I'm just an airman who did her job." The real heroes are the people who found the courage to speak up after seeing that it was possible. The legacy of Staff Sergeant Emma Rodriguez wasn't measured in awards or commendations, though those came. It was measured in the countless airmen who went to work each day knowing they could report problems without fear, in the improved safety culture that prevented accidents, in the young women who stayed in the military because they believed they could make a difference, and in a small office at Nellis Air Force Base where a quiet supervisor continued to do what she'd always done best: listen, learn, and help others find their own strength. The woman they had once laughed at had become the woman they now looked up to, and she was still, at heart, exactly who she'd always been, someone who believed that doing the right thing was more important than being comfortable. In the end, that was enough to change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.